The general's laughter boomed across the airfield as he pointed at the elderly woman. "Ma'am, this is a restricted military base, not a nursing home tour. You need to leave before you hurt yourself." 81-year-old Eleanor "Ellie" Hayes stood beside the F-16 Fighting Falcon, her gray hair blowing in the wind, while a crowd of young pilots snickered behind him. None of them noticed the faded wings pin on her leather jacket or the way she examined the aircraft like she was coming home. What this grandmother does next will shock you to your core. If you think age and gender shouldn't limit what someone can achieve, smash that subscribe button and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? Let's prove them all wrong together. Eleanor Hayes had driven 4 hours to Nellis Air Force Base for the annual air show. It was supposed to be a quiet day remembering her late husband Tom, who had been stationed here 40 years ago. She just wanted to see the planes up close one more time, but when she wandered too close to the restricted flight line, everything went wrong. "Hey lady," shouted a young airman. "You can't be back here. This area is off limits to civilians." Eleanor turned slowly, her arthritis making quick movements painful. "I'm sorry, I was just looking at the F-16. It's been a while since I've seen one this close." The commotion drew attention. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered, including General Marcus Webb, a man in his 50s with a chest full of ribbons and an attitude to match. General Webb strode over with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. "What's the situation here, Airman?" "Sir, this elderly woman wandered into the restricted area. She claims she wants to look at the aircraft." General Webb looked Eleanor up and down, taking in her simple clothes, her gray hair, and the walking cane she used to steady herself. His expression shifted from annoyance to amusement. "Ma'am," he said with a condescending smile, "I appreciate your interest in our aircraft, but this isn't a museum. These are multi-million-dollar war machines, not tourist attractions." Eleanor nodded politely. "I understand, General. I just haven't seen an F-16 since I flew one." The statement hung in the air for a moment before General Webb burst into laughter. The sound was loud and mocking, and soon other personnel were chuckling along. "You flew one?" Webb wiped tears from his eyes. "Ma'am, with all due respect, F-16s weren't even delivered to the Air Force until 1978. You would have been, what, 35 years old? And women weren't even allowed in combat roles back then." A young female pilot stepped forward from the crowd. "Sir, she's obviously confused. Maybe she means she took a tour of one or saw one at an air show." Eleanor's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "No, Lieutenant, I mean I flew one. Quite a few, actually." General Webb's laughter got louder. "This is rich. Listen, Grandma, I don't know what fantasy world you're living in, but women your age were home baking cookies when these birds were first taking to the sky. The closest you got to flying was probably a commercial airline." The crowd was growing. More pilots, mechanics, and base personnel were gathering to watch what they thought was an entertaining show. Someone started recording on their phone. "She probably watched Top Gun too many times," joked a young mechanic. Hitting laughs from the crowd, General Webb was enjoying the attention. "You know what, ma'am? I'll play along. What squadron were you with? What was your call sign? Hell, what's your favorite maneuver?" Eleanor looked around at the faces surrounding her, young men and women in uniform who saw her as nothing more than a confused old lady. She thought about walking away, about avoiding the humiliation. But then she saw the F-16 behind them, sitting on the tarmac like an old friend waiting for her. "I was with the 388th Tactical Fighter Wing," Eleanor said quietly. "My call sign was Viper, and my favorite maneuver was always the vertical climb followed by a splitus recovery." General Webb's grin got wider. "The 388th? That's a real unit. I'll give you that. Someone's done their homework. But Viper? Really? That's the nickname for the F-16 itself." You couldn't come up with something more original? The crowd laughed again. A senior airman shook his head. She probably looked it up on Wikipedia on the drive over here. Eleanor reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, she extracted a faded photograph and held it up. The picture showed a young woman in a flight suit standing next to an F-16, helmet under her arm, with short dark hair and a confident smile. "That's me in 1981, she said simply. General Webb barely glanced at the photo. "Ma'am, that could be anyone. Photoshop can work miracles these days. Besides, even if that is you, which I doubt, being in a photo with an aircraft doesn't mean you." "Flew it." A colonel who had been watching from the back stepped forward. "General Webb, maybe we should—" "No, Colonel," Webb cut him off. "I want to see how far this goes." "Ma'am, you claim you flew F-16s. Prove it. Tell me something that only a real pilot would know." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, looking at the faces around her. Most showed amusement or pity. A few looked uncomfortable with how the situation was developing. The young female pilot looked embarrassed for her. "The F-16 has a side stick controller instead of a center stick," Eleanor began. "The pilot sits in a reclined position under a bubble canopy. The engine is a Pratt & Whitney F-100, and the aircraft has a maximum speed of Mach 2.05. It can pull 9 gigaseconds in a sustained turn." General Webb waved dismissively. "Anyone can read those specs online. Tell me something real pilots know. Something you can't Google." Eleanor's voice got stronger. "When you're pulling high Gs, your vision starts to gray out from the outside in. First you lose peripheral vision, then tunnel vision sets in. If you don't ease off, you'll GLOC, lose consciousness completely. The trick is to do what we called the AGSM, anti-G straining maneuver. You tense your leg and abdominal muscles and do a controlled breathing technique to keep blood flowing to your brain." Some of the pilots in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. That was detailed knowledge. General Webb's smile faltered for just a moment, then returned. "Lucky guess. You could have learned that from any pilot at a bar." "The scariest moment in an F-16 isn't combat," Eleanor continued. "It's engine failure during takeoff. You have maybe 3 seconds to decide, punch out, or try to recover. If you're too low and too slow, the ejection seat will kill you. If you try to recover and fail, you'll die in the crash. I had an engine flame out during takeoff at Hill Air Force Base in 1984. I was at 200 feet when it happened." The laughter had stopped. The crowd was listening intently now. "What did you do?" asked the young female pilot, her voice barely above a whisper. "I pushed the nose down, traded altitude for airspeed, and managed to restart the engine at 50 feet. Scariest 30 seconds of my life." Eleanor's voice carried the weight of someone reliving a moment of terror from decades past. General Webb's confidence was shaking, but he pressed on. "Even if you knew someone who told you that story, it doesn't prove anything. Women weren't flying combat missions in the 1980s. "You're right," Eleanor said. "Officially, we weren't. But unofficially, some of us were doing things that don't appear in any history books." She looked directly at General Webb. "You want proof? Get me clearance to sit in that cockpit for 5 minutes. I'll show you things about that aircraft that aren't in any manual." General Webb laughed, but it sounded forced now. "Ma'am, I'm not putting a civilian, especially an elderly woman, in a multi-million-dollar fighter aircraft. You could damage something. I'm not asking to fly it," Eleanor sighed. "I'm asking to sit in it. If I'm just some confused old lady who's never seen the inside of an F-16, what harm could I do?" The challenge hung in the air. The crowd was silent now, sensing that something had shifted. The colonel who had tried to intervene earlier stepped forward again. "General, perhaps we should check her credentials before." "No," General Webb snapped. "This has gone far enough. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the base. Security will escort you to your vehicle. But before security could step forward, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. Eleanor Hayes? Everyone turned to see a man in his 60s approaching. He wore a flight suit with Colonel's eagles and had the bearing of someone who had spent his life in cockpits. Colonel Rodriguez? Eleanor's face lit up with recognition. I'll be damned, Colonel Rodriguez sighed, breaking into a huge grin. Viper Hayes, I heard your voice and thought I was losing my mind. General Webb looked confused. Colonel, do you know this woman? Colonel Rodriguez's expression grew serious. Sir, this woman taught me how to fly. She was my instructor at the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base in 1985. The crowd murmured in confusion. General Webb's face had gone pale. That's impossible, Webb said weakly. Women weren't, sir, Colonel Rodriguez interrupted. Eleanor Hayes is one of the most decorated test pilots in Air Force history. She flew prototype aircraft that are still classified today. She broke the sound barrier in 17 different aircraft types. Eleanor smiled softly. Miguel, you don't need to. No, Viper, they need to hear this. Rodriguez's voice carried clearly across the silent crowd. General Webb, this woman has more flight time and more aircraft than everyone here combined. She flew missions that don't exist on paper, tested aircraft that officially were never built, and saved more lives than you'll ever know about. General Webb was speechless. The crowd of young pilots and airmen were staring at Eleanor with new eyes. Rodriguez continued. The reason there's no official record of women flying combat missions in the 1980s is because the best of us were doing things that were so classified. They're still classified 40 years later. He turned to Eleanor. Viper, what are you doing here? I came for the air show. Tom always loved watching the F-16 demonstrations. Her voice was soft with memory. Rodriguez nodded solemnly. How is Tom? He passed last year. Cancer. I'm sorry. He was a good man. Rodriguez looked around at the crowd, then back to Eleanor. You know what? I think it's time these young pilots learned what a real aviator looks like. He turned to General Webb. Sir, with your permission, I'd like Colonel Hayes to give us a demonstration. Colonel Hayes? General Webb's voice cracked. Sir, Eleanor retired as a full colonel in 1995. She was promoted to general in 2001, but declined the position to care for her husband. Rodriguez walked over to the F-16 and began the pre-flight inspection routine. Viper, this bird is scheduled for a training flight in 20 minutes. The pilot called in sick. You interested in taking her up? Eleanor looked at the aircraft, then at the crowd of young faces staring at her in amazement. Miguel, I haven't flown in 15 years. It's like riding a bicycle, he said with a grin. Besides, I'll be right there in the chase plane if you need me. General Webb found his voice. Now wait just a minute. I can't authorize a civilian to fly military aircraft. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and made a quick call. After a brief conversation, he hung up and smiled. General Webb, I just spoke with General Morrison at Pentagon. Colonel Hayes has been cleared for flight status. Apparently, her security clearance was never revoked. Eleanor looked around at all the faces, young pilots who had been laughing at her minutes ago, the female pilot who had looked embarrassed for her, the mechanics who had made jokes. Now they were all silent, waiting. All right, Eleanor said quietly. Let's go flying. What happened next became legend at Nellis Air Force Base. Eleanor Hayes walked to that F-16 with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. She did her pre-flight inspection with the precision of a pilot who had done it thousands of times. She climbed into the cockpit with an ease that defied her 81 years. When the engines fired up, the sound seemed different, not just the roar of a machine, but the voice of something coming alive in the hands of someone who truly understood it. Eleanor took that F-16 into a vertical climb that seemed to defy physics. She performed maneuvers that left the crowd speechless and had experienced pilots shaking their heads in amazement. For 20 minutes, she flew like she was 30 years old again, like the sky was her home and the earth was just a place she visited. When she landed, the entire base had gathered to watch. As she climbed out of the cockpit, the crowd erupted in applause that could be heard for miles. General Webb was the first to approach her. His arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine respect and embarrassment. "Colonel Hayes," he said, offering his hand, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you several apologies." Eleanor shook his hand. "General, you judged me based on what you saw, an old woman who didn't look like she belonged. I understand that. But I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations." The young female pilot stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Colonel Hayes, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Kim. What you just did up there, I've never seen flying like that." Eleanor smiled. "Lieutenant, how long have you been flying F-16s? 2 years, ma'am. Would you like some pointers? I've got time, and Miguel tells me they've got a 2-seater we could take up." The video of Eleanor's flight went viral within hours. Not just the flying, but the moment when a room full of people realized they had completely misjudged someone based on age and gender. Eleanor Hayes never meant to become famous. She just wanted to see the planes and remember her husband. But her story became a reminder that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect, and that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary appearances. General Webb kept his job, but he also kept Eleanor's lesson. He instituted a new policy at Nellis: respect first, questions later. Because sometimes the person you're laughing at is actually the person who could teach you everything you think you know. Eleanor still visits air bases sometimes, not for attention or recognition, but because young pilots like Lieutenant Kim ask her to share what she knows. And in a world that often forgets its heroes, she reminds everyone that greatness comes in all shapes, sizes, and ages. Sometimes the person who looks least likely to belong is exactly the person who built the place where you're standing.